January 6th, the day of the Capitol Hill riots, we've spent a lot of time talking about these cases. We were broadcasting on that very day, doing a minute-by-minute analysis of what was happening. And we've been following the cases along throughout the entirety of the prosecution. We've talked about the government sort of asking for continuances, not agreeing to let certain people out of custody. We've talked about the inability to sort of deal with a big bubble of cases that are working their way through 300, 400, 500 new cases. Seemed to be something that broke the prosecution's office out there at the U.S. Attorney's Office. And so a lot of criticisms about how this has all been unfolding in front of us. But I've always had a lot of questions about how did this all happen in the first place? And I've been pretty consistent here on this channel asking for investigations. I want to know who is responsible from top to bottom, because in this country, we have a lot of people who are responsible for making sure that we're safe. We've got, I think, 18 different intelligence community agencies that we're going to be looking at. And we've got the DC Metro Police, the Capitol Hill Police, and the list goes on. National Guard was there, and there was a catastrophic failure. And so in my mind, yes, it is easy for me, somebody who has a lot of criticisms for the government in general, recognizing that it's a massive, ineffective bureaucracy that doesn't do much. It's easy for me to say, well, I guess they all just failed, right? They all just failed. Every single one of them, from the FBI all the way down through the Sergeant of Arms for both houses. We have every single entity just failed. And the center of our government in the United States was commandeered by, 300 or 400 or 1,000, however many people, doesn't matter. The point is it happened. How did that happen if we spend billions of dollars every year to prop up every one of these agencies? They're supposed to be intelligent. They're supposed to be encouraging and protecting the country, in particular, the Capitol building, and they failed dramatically. So what happened then? I want to know who's responsible for it, right? How do we have this domino effect, this sequence of catastrophic failures to such a degree that something like this can happen? Seems pretty amazing to me. So I've always had questions about this. Did the government, were they sort of involved, or did somebody sort of, have a stand down order? And I know it's conspiratorial, but it is something that sort of, it might have a little bit of smoke there, right? Maybe there are some people, I've known this in my experience as a criminal defense lawyer, who are a part of law enforcement, who kind of bend the rules a little bit, right? They sort of maneuver things around the edges. And so I want to share this story with you from Revolver, where they're talking about another situation and comparing it to this case where something like that may have happened, where the FBI, where law enforcement, where anybody who is investigating a lot of these militia groups, the people that the media and that the government is claiming is responsible for the January 6th riots. What if the government was sort of, kind of in on it? What if they were acting as informants or co-conspirators, and they were encouraging some of this activity to take place? Wouldn't that be a big stinking problem? It certainly would. Now, Revolver has done a lot of the heavy lifting on this. I want to show you their article. We are not going to be able to go through this in its entirety. It is a long one, and they're going to go through a lot of it in very, very intensive depth. I would encourage you to go read this. Okay, it's at Revolver.news. It's right on their homepage, so go check it out. This was published June 14th. Tucker talked about it yesterday. Un-indicted co-conspirators in the 1-6 cases raised disturbing questions of federal foreknowledge. Right? And we're going to go through this, as topically as we can. And it starts off. It says, of all the questions asked, of all the words spoken, of all the ink spilled, and the so-called Capitol siege, none hold the key to the entire event quite like what Senator Amy Klobuchar asked of Christopher Wray. Okay, Amy Klobuchar is this woman. We've seen her before. She was a big, highly involved in the last election. I think she was even running for the last election in the primaries, got kind of far, in fact. And she's been involved, right? She's a Democrat from Minnesota. She asked the Trump-appointed FBI director, did the federal government infiltrate any of the so-called militia organizations claimed to be responsible for planning and executing the siege? Okay, and it's a pretty important question, because we've seen historically, and we've covered it on this channel, and we're going to talk about it very briefly here, another case very similar to this, where there was a group of people who were going to allegedly go and, commit a kidnapping of the Michigan governor, Gretchen Whitmer, Big Gretch Rona. And what happened was, turns out there were like, of the 14 people who were all involved in that little scheme, like 5 of them were FBI informants. They were part of the government. And some of these people were kind of really encouraging the criminality And what Revolver is saying, the big takeaway from this entire article, is that the government is not being honest about who those people are. They're putting them in reports, not as informants, not as undercover agents, not as CIs, confidential informants. They're calling them individuals, just other people that are making it into these reports, that are part of these investigations, that are unindicted co-conspirators, but are in fact more than that. And so a lot of the response to this article has been like, it's not possible for the government to charge an FBI informant because they're not actually co-conspirators. So we're kind of missing the mark here a little bit. So we've got some work to do on this article to sort of dissect it a little bit, because there's a lot of stuff that's being said about it that I think is sort of missing the mark. Let's start off by going back to the beginning. Here is Amy Klobuchar now. This is taking place on March 2nd. She's asking FBI Director Christopher Wray about whether or not he knows that there was anything taking place, or no, whether there were any undercover informants from the government that had infiltrated the militias. But I actually oversold that a little bit. She's not asking that. She's sort of opining. She's saying, like, wouldn't it be nice if we did have informants in there? And then Christopher Wray goes, gosh, it would be. And you're going to hear him, right? He's an aw shucks, just golly gee shucks guy. He says, you're darn tootin'. What? Listen to him. You're going to hear him say this. Our FBI director, you're darn tootin'. We're going to work hard out there, Amy, and solve American problems. So we've got this guy here. Nobody's actually answering the question. She says it would be nice if we had undercover informants in there. Not, do we? And if so, how many? And if so, why did they fail to notify law enforcement about this pending attack? And why didn't you do anything to stop it, right? No follow-ups like that. It's just two people who are on the same side who want to make a political statement commiserating with one another. Here they are.
And they show up, we now know in this complaint, with encrypted two-way Chinese radios in military gear, there must be moments where you think, if we would have known, if we could have infiltrated this group or found out what they were doing. And that, do you have those moments?
Absolutely. I will tell you, Senator, and this is something I feel passionately about, that anytime there's an attack, our standard at the FBI is we aim to bat 1,000, right? And we aim to thwart every attack that's out there. So anytime there's an attack, especially one that's this horrific, that strikes right at the heart of our system of government, right at the time transfer of power is being discussed, you can be darn tootin' that we are focused very, very hard on how can we get better sources, better information, better analysis, so that we can make sure that something like what happened on January.
All right, so doesn't happen again. Got it, right? So he doesn't really answer anything there. She kind of allows him to, just like Revolver says, weasel his way out of answering the question directly. Klobuchar does him the courtesy of not asking him anything. Klobuchar instead asks the director if he wishes he had infiltrated, right, rather than did you. Revolver.news, they say they want to address it directly, and so they've got these questions that we're going to ask, and I want to run through these briefly. In the year leading up to 1/6 and during 1/6 itself, to what extent were the three primary militia groups, and recall these names, we talked about a lot of these here, Oath Keepers, Proud Boys, and the 3%ers. Okay, we're going to revisit those. They're saying that the FBI, the DOJ, the Pentagon, Network News, they've labeled the most responsible. How much of those agencies were infiltrated by the federal government or had informants within there? Okay, how many? I would love to know that. We're going to break that down. Number two, exactly how many federal undercover agents or confidential informants were present at the Capitol or in the Capitol during the infamous siege, and what roles did they play? Merely passive informants, or were they active instigators? There are some very interesting YouTube videos floating around making an argument that it is the latter. Finally, of all the unindicted co-conspirators referenced in the documents, how many worked as confidential informants or as an undercover operative for the federal government, FBI, Army counterintelligence, etc.? So very good questions. Very good questions. And if you read this, Revolver News actually says that, there's a lot more coming, so buckle up. My question, my initial thought is maybe they filed FOIA requests asking for some of that information. And I'm not sure if they would have gotten anything back since they would have been undercover confidential, but maybe they have, maybe they've seen what they've asked for, what they've gotten, and they can identify and sort of piece together what is missing from what should be there, and they can make some deductions about that. We don't know. But some very good questions. And one of the big responses has been from, law Twitter and from the lawyers is, hey, you're kind of mixing things up. Everybody's getting all this confused. So we've got Brad Heath. He says, guys, agents and informants basically can't be co-conspirators. It says this has been the law for a while, right? Agents and informers, they cannot be conspirators, because conspirators means that you're sort of intending to go, break the law. Like you can't, it's got to be more than just sort of talk. You got to have a common scheme or plan. You got to do an act in furtherance of it. And so if you are an agent, then obviously you're not a part of that common scheme or plan, and you're not really doing anything to further it, because you should be, if you're an informer or an agent, preventing the harm from happening. So Andy McCarthy also says, not sure I understand the story, but by definition, a government informant cannot be an unindicted co-conspirator, right? Conspiracy is an agreement to commit a crime. If you are there on behalf of police to inform, then you haven't agreed. Okay. Now, so the distinction here becomes, are they being properly labeled as government informants, or are these people just being labeled individuals, right? That they're not indicting. Unindicted co-conspirators. These could be individuals. This could be a wife. This could be a friend. This could be somebody who ratted out on somebody. But it's kind of what we're talking about, but also kind of not, because we're talking about maybe the fact that the government is not labeling certain of these informants or these undercover people as government agents, as government informants. They're just calling them individuals, which is why they have to label them as unindicted co-conspirators. So there's a lot of mess going on here. Let's see if we can tease out what's happening. Now, on Twitter, I want to show you some more cope. Okay, so Twitter did not like what Tucker Carlson did last night on his show. And if you missed that, I'd encourage you to go watch it. There's like a 10-minute clip that's floating around on Twitter, because he gets hot about this, as he should. It's a big issue. Now, Tucker Carlson on Twitter, the way that Twitter works, if you're not a person who's on there, is on the from time to time you'll get on the sidebar, there'll be this trending box, and the trending box is sort of supposed to be, what's trending on Twitter, but it's not being run by an algorithm. Okay, these are certain people who see what's going on, and they write these little things that they post up there. So it's sort of an explanation. And the way that this works, practically speaking, it's sort of the worst part of Twitter, but they make these little propaganda statements that come out. So when something's trending, then they really go in and they have to cope. They have to sort of do what they can to justify what's happening. So this was trending today, and they said Tucker Carlson, right? A lot of people were talking about this clip, 69,000 tweets. So they want to clarify for you, in case you're too dumb to know, they say that federal law does not permit cooperating witnesses or informants to be charged with conspiracy. Okay. So first of all, that's hilarious, right? Because there is never anything in the law that is sort of absolute. So they say federal law does not permit it, cooperating witnesses or informants to be charged with conspiracy. Like, that's a blanket statement, right? Now you can find a lawyer who will tell you that, but they're being a little bit intellectually dishonest, because what all lawyers know the first day of law school, when you go to law school, you learn what is the answer to any legal question ever presented, ever. It's the right answer, right? Any question, 2 words, it depends. And you argue both sides of that, because that's kind of how the law works. That's why you are never done being a lawyer, right? You're always practicing, because there's always arguments to be made. So you can say federal law does not permit cooperating witnesses or informants to be charged with conspiracy. Pretty sure I could find you probably 25 cases that make an argument to the contrary in some way, shape, or form. Don't know if it's going to be a successful argument, but it's probably very possible, right? I've never personally made that argument, but I would guess that you could. And so it's kind of hilarious as a lawyer to see some, Twitter intern, moron out there typing up a response because they didn't like Tucker's response. They didn't like that he was trending, so they got to respond back. They also say that the federal law does not allow it, despite a baseless suggestion by Carlson that some co-conspirators were not charged because they were undercover FBI agents. So it's like, they have to just chime in on that conversation. It's like when you're at a dinner table and you got a friend there and you're having a conversation, and the person across the table says, actually, that's not how that works. I've been to Peru. Okay. The boats there, they're not that big. You're going, we're not even talking to you. I don't care about Peru or the boats, or what are you talking about? Leave us alone. So it's kind of like that. Twitter just wants to inject itself when nobody cares. So the question that I've always had here, of course, and I mentioned this at the start of this segment, is where has our intelligence agency been? Where are they? Okay, this is the list of them. There are a lot of them. Let's take a look at them. We've got the Air Force. So this is something that you can gather. over from the ODNI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. It's a clearinghouse for all of the 18 different agencies that manage intelligence throughout this country. You're going to see a lot of them on here. We got the Air Force Intelligence, Army, CIA, Coast Guard. We got the Defense Intelligence Agency. The Department of Energy has its own energy. Of course, we have DHS, Department of Homeland Security. State has theirs. Treasury has theirs for the money. We got the DEA. We've got the FBI. We got the Marine Corps. We have the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, which is doing things in geospatial intelligence. We've got National Reconnaissance Office. We've got the National Security Agency. We've got the Navy Intelligence, and now newly added the Space Force. These are all being held and managed by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Okay, and they're supposed to investigate all sorts of crimes, all sorts of criminality. They should be, I would imagine, one of the top priorities would be to protect the U.S. government, places like the Capitol building and all the people that inhabit that building, because they're kind of important to the U.S. government. Now, this is not the extent of this. We have the National Guard. We have the Capitol Hill Police. We have the Sergeant at Arms for both the Senate and the House, who are responsible for their little forces. They've got the Metro Police, and the list goes on. And everybody failed from top to bottom. They all just dropped the ball. So, how does that happen? Yesterday on the show, we tried to talk about how to prioritize and break down what some of the harm looks like. And I want to just recover this quickly. If you recall, there was a report that came out yesterday, 32 pages, from the Biden administration that was detailing how they're going to be handling domestic extremism in the United States, whatever that happens to be. And they lumped them into all these different categories. Yesterday, we put together this chart, and we were trying to identify which groups are the biggest problems. Okay, because we know what the current administration is saying. They're telling us it's sort of these people at the top, the white supremacists, the QAnoners, and the militias. Okay, we've seen this a lot. Then we're also hearing that these are the big groups, right? These are the big groups that are responsible for all the madness and chaos and destruction, which I personally have not seen much of that outside the allegations that maybe this was something responsible for the January 6th stuff. Then we also have the government is sort of saying that in addition to wanting to put this really hard law enforcement emphasis on the groups, that this is difficult to solve because a lot of this stuff is done by individuals as well. And so this is what's going to justify this massive national dragnet that's going to gobble up more information, capture more innocent people. But these are all based on things that are individual, like race-based shootings, violence against women, violence against the LGBTQ. We've had some shootings take place. We've had, the list goes on. And so what I would like to do as somebody who is a person interested in solutions is have our government sort of prioritize these for us. Tell us which ones are the biggest, which one of these groups results in the most loss of life. Who's responsible for the most deaths on the planet? Which one is it, or in this country? And once we know that number, then maybe we can identify how much monetary loss they are causing, how much actual property destruction. And then in addition to that, we can talk about economic loss, right? What are they preventing you from doing? When Chaz took over that little, zip code of land there, what did that do to the economy there for those, for that city, for those local business owners and things like that? Then we want to take a look at group size. You can easily take a look at all of the other demographics. We talked about this yesterday. Things like income, religion, ethnicity, right? The list goes on because we want to solve the problem. Right now, they're telling us it's white supremacists, QAnoners, and the militias. But do we know that? They tell us that, but we don't really know, do we? So now we're starting to see that there are some clarity about the militia groups, right? We've seen this from the Revolver story where they're telling us, how about we take a look at the Oath Keepers specifically? We've covered this. I know they're blaming the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys and the 3%ers. Those are the big three that they labeled for January 6th. So now let's take a look at those and let's compare them to maybe some groups that arguably are on the left. Okay, so I want to show you, I did some research on this afternoon. Let's take the top three that they are claiming are the right-wing organizations. Then we've got, let's pick some other groups that may be on the left, right? I don't know where Antifa would actually put themselves, but I'm going to put them on the left. We've got BLM, which some people might argue is sort of, middle. So we'll kind of keep them in the middle. We've got Antifa, we've got ALF, which is the Animal Liberation Front, and ELF, which is the Environmental Liberation Front. And then we have the Black Bloc. Okay, you can go on counterextremism.com and look up extreme left-wing groups. You'll find many more. So the question then is, now we've got sort of this category that they're saying are the right-wingers. We've got this category that maybe are the left-wingers. And we can just do a simple analysis. How many people did each group kill? How much money and damage did each group cause? How much loss of economic activity did each group result in? How big is each group? How many confidential informants do you have in those groups? And then really you could come to some sort of a total equation on what the harm is, right? You could say, okay, we had 100 people were killed here. It cost $1 million over here. And the economic loss was maybe $2 million in lost productivity. The group is 5,000 people big. We have 500, or 50 confidential informants in there. And so you can just come up with an equation. We add all of these up, that plus that plus that, maybe multiply that times the size, divide that by the total number of confidential informants in there, and we get a harm ratio, whatever that looks like. Okay, you come up with some sort of way to quantify this. And then we start to solve the problems, whatever that looks like, right? And this is for the government and the FBI and all these people to figure out. But I don't buy the premise yet that the groups that they're saying are responsible for it are in fact responsible for it, because we know the government is filled with liars. So now that we have that data fleshed out, we have some information that is on a chart that we can sort of plot. I want to show you how I'm sort of thinking about this. This is the distribution curve, right? So we're all familiar with sort of a bell curve. But my question for our government, my question before they start passing all of these domestic extremist laws, before they start trying to, take more stuff away from us, I want them to quantify, how does the amount of harm distribute across the nation? So let me show you what I mean by this. We all know what a bell curve looks like. And if the total amount of harm is what, let's say, Biden and Merrick Garland say, what does that relationship look like, right? All of the harm is coming from the right. Okay, so this is what the distribution of the curve would look like. It's all happening here. We don't see anything from BLM. We saw yesterday, we read through that 32-page report, nothing from BLM, no harm over here, all empty. Nothing from Antifa. So what they are telling us is that all of the harm is coming from the right. Militias, Oath Keepers, Proud Boys, so on, MAGA Trump supporters. So my question is that accurate? Okay, or does it look, something like maybe like this, like a regular bell curve? Okay, well, maybe most of the violence isn't actually coming from the left. Maybe most of the violence isn't actually coming from the right. Maybe most of these shootings and deaths and all the loss, all the harm, it's kind of coming from people who maybe are just not apolitical. They're just a little bit crazy, right? They're just kind of, not really political one way or the other. We've got some people who just want to go shoot up a building or shoot up something because they're just kind of mentally deranged, right? That's going to happen in a country of 370 million people. You're going to have a lot of harm that just comes from the center that's not connected politically one way at all, right? It may not even be domestic terrorism or domestic extremism by the standard definition. It's just a crazy person. Okay, we're going to have those. And they are thankfully very few and far between. And the likelihood of you being injured or killed by one of those things is so infinitesimally small, it's almost not even worth considering. But we're turning it into something where it looks like what we're trying to do is make stuff that maybe in center distribution, we're trying to sort of cram this all one direction. Right? We're sort of saying, oh, that's all this. Everything that happens is going this way because we want the administration, the people who want to harm the right want to make it look like this. When in reality, in my perspective, from what we've been covering on this channel, it more looks like this. Okay? The burning buildings, the torching of used car lots, Wendy's being burnt down. I mean, everything outside of the Capitol building that we've been following on this channel has largely been this. Okay, Antifa's been setting up their own stinking cities within cities in different parts of the country. So is it this, or is it something that maybe actually looks like this, right? Maybe the harm is something like that. Maybe the political violence is more evenly distributed. But if this is the case, folks, we are not talking about any enforcement over here. We're only talking about this: militias, Oath Keepers, right-wingers. We're not talking about Antifa. They don't come up at all in any of this stuff, or BLM, or ALF, or ELF, or the Black Bloc. None of it, because we're only focused on a political group. They want to skewer one political ideology. So I would like to know, where do we stand? Because this does not feel exactly right. And if they're going to be making that claim, I would like to see some evidence to back that up. Outside of January 6th. and I haven't seen it thus far. So the story continues. If it turns out the federal government did in fact have undercover agents or confidential informants embedded within the so-called militia groups, indicted for conspiring to obstruct the Senate certification, the implications would be nothing short of seismic, especially if such agents informants enjoyed extremely senior level positions within such groups. Okay, we're going to go through this. Oh my goodness, this is explosive. Let me show you this. We're going to get there in a second. We got a couple more slides first. Let's say this. Let's say that the FBI had agents or informants that were in extremely senior level positions. This posits that allegation. And one of the key consensus points among the FBI, DOJ, and the regime media is that while 1/6 is primarily the fault of Trump supporting QAnon-infused domestic terrorists, it is secondarily the fault of so-called intelligence failures. Okay, so we've got sort of, two groups: all the Trump maniacs and all of the intelligence failures, which were a lot of them. Now, what are they talking about? Let's take a look. Klobuchar's own question at the March 2 FBI hearing reinforces this, quote, intelligence failure narrative. But she's not alone. A 5-month bipartisan Senate investigation recently arrived at the very same intelligence failure narrative to explain the breach. This block quote says, a bipartisan Senate investigation of January 6 found the security and intelligence failures at every level of the government that led to the breach of the Capitol by a pro-Trump mob. 95-page report, product of a roughly 5-month joint probe, found significant breakdowns ranging from federal intelligence agencies failing to warn of a potential for violence to a lack of planning and preparation by the U.S. Capitol Police and law enforcement leadership. There was no overall operational or staffing plan for that day, a total failure of leadership, according to the committees. Okay, which is, we've already seen this story before, right? Sort of saw that on 9/11, right? The last time that they wanted to go after the terrorists, those were foreign terrorists. Now it's sort of domestic terror. Oh, the government is incompetent. We throw literally hundreds of billions of dollars to prevent this stuff. They couldn't even communicate. It's shocking at how incompetent our government is. I mean, it's really surprising. I've always known that and suspected it, but it is actually quite something. Now, they go back and they show us, they walk us through this this story. We've talked about the story here, the Whitmer kidnapping plot, right? And this is where we're going to see some evidence that maybe they're classifying their undercover people a little bit differently. They say, and I want to just flesh this out again. They go into extreme depth on this. I'm like picking out a couple paragraphs of a massive document. So bear that in mind. They say, of course, we could point to countless examples of undercover agents being actively involved in domestic terror plots. But for the purposes of argument we're making here, we only have to go back a few months, back to prior to 1/6, the so-called Whitmer kidnapping plot. And the allegation here is that the FBI was involved or somebody was involved. Indeed, what if you were told that scarcely 3 months before the 1/6 Capitol siege, the FBI actually arrested 14 people for planning to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer? We talked about this. They also wanted to overthrow the state government, and that the alleged conspiracy to overthrow the state government involves storming the state capitol. Sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? And what if we told you that of the 14 individuals who allegedly plotted the, quote, kidnapping and overthrow of the government, that at least 5 were undercover agents and federal informants? Okay, so almost a third, over a third, at least 5, at least a third, were actually undercover agents and federal informants. And if that's not enough, this article says, many of the individuals allegedly involved in this plot appear to belong to, quote, the 3 percenters, one of the same very militia groups now blamed for the storming of January 6. Continues, and as the cherry on top, what if we also told you that the director of the Detroit FBI field office, who oversaw the infiltration of the Michigan plot, was subsequently granted a highly coincidental promotion to the D.C. office, where he is now FBI lead agent for all of the January 6 cases? That sounds pretty interesting. Sounds kind of coincidental, doesn't it? Maybe that's all it is. Maybe it's just a coincidence. I don't know. Read the full article if you want to get more on that. But the point here we're going to get to is we're going to revisit that, and we're going to talk about that concept of at least 5 agents, maybe more, because of this misclassification problem. And if you recall, I mentioned previously the idea that maybe there are informants who are at senior levels of some of these organizations. I talked about this yesterday. Enrique Tarrio. Remember, this was the white supremacist who is not a white guy, who is leading a white supremacist organization as the president of some chapter. Well, what if that actually, I had questions about that yesterday. I was saying, how can you be a white supremacist without being white? It was not computing for me, but what do I know? Tarrio, according to this article, may have actually been in cahoots, or actually was confirmed to be in cahoots with the FBI. Let's take a read of this article. A full discussion of Tarrio is outside the scope of this piece, though, they say. But for now, we're going to simply note how remarkably convenient it is that the head of the Proud Boys, a known FBI informant, just happened to get arrested and banned from D.C. the day before the January 6th protest, in which the Proud Boys were involved. Did they pull him out? Set the whole thing up and pull him out? Article says, what better excuse for the leader to not be present on that fateful day, right? Big day. Why wasn't he there? Oh, he got arrested. Oh, that's why he's not there. No, that's pretty convenient, isn't it? Upon Tarrio's arrest on the 4th, the quote, the upper tier leadership of the MOSD Telegram channel was nuked, and a channel new MOSD took place. We now know that this top leadership Telegram group included un-indicted co-conspirators UCC 1, Person 2, as well as Proud Boys North Carolina chapter lead Charles Donahoe. Okay, on January 4th, shortly after the Proud Boys chairman's arrest pursuant to a warrant was issued, Donahoe expressed concern that the encrypted communications that involved the Proud Boys chairman would be compromised. When law enforcement examined Proud Boys chairman's phone, Donahoe created a new channel on the app, took steps to destroy and nuke the earlier channel. The new channel included several additional members. Okay, now it's a possibility, isn't it? This is where defense attorneys live, in possibilities. And we like to play with these ideas. And let's take a look at how this wraps up. Now, what if this person, Steve Robeson, okay, and you're going to note here in quotes, it says, quote, an individual. Okay, so Steve Robeson is being categorized by the FBI as an individual. They're saying that him being outed as a deep undercover FBI mole just months ago in the Michigan plot, among other incidents, calls into question every other major unindicted co-conspirator in the case. So here's what happened. Let's see here. It says, indeed, in this case of Robeson, the FBI and the DOJ conspired to use this exact language trick to hide evidence of the secret FBI informants from the judge, defense counsel, and the public. So what does this mean? They're saying that when they were writing their reports against the Whitmer plotters, that they were calling people Person 1, Person 2, UCC 1 individuals. And they were saying for some time that the individuals were not confidential informants, right? They were unindicted co-conspirators. But what if, because you can't indict an informant, so they can't be labeled unindicted co-conspirators, because they would be the wrong, like you cannot indict them. So they're sort of fighting over the language here. But the point is, what if in the FBI investigations, they were not properly labeling their undercover agents? They were calling them individuals. Later on, it comes out, oh, they were in fact undercover agents, undercover individuals. That makes it almost impossible for the defense to know anything about how to prepare the defense, because it's looking like all of this undercover confidential information, it's outside of our ability to review it. It's outside of discovery because it's confidential and undercover. Whew. Okay, so let's wrap this up. It says, in the end, we are left with burning questions that ought to entirely reshape the way the nation thinks and talks about the events. From now on, every politician commenter who cares about 1-6 has a duty to pressure FBI Director Wray to come clean. In the very beginning of the piece, we drew attention to Klobuchar asking Wray about whether there were anybody who infiltrated. Don't you ever kick yourself, she asked the director, for not having infiltrated these groups. Now, armed with the research in this article, any politician ought to kick themselves if they do not ask the following. How many of the unindicted co-conspirators in January 6 cases are now or have been undercover agents or confidential informants? Indeed, pulling on the thread of the developed world, they're saying this could be a potentially extraordinary scandal. They say, stay tuned. We are not done yet. All right, we're going to see. We're going to see if anything else comes of that. Let's take some questions over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Joe Snow is in the house, says, I'm hearing some of the January 6 prisoners who are being denied bond are showing up to court with black eyes. And the ones who have been formally charged are being charged with things like trespassing versus insurrection or terrorism. Have you heard anything like that? What's your opinion of judges who observe black eyes in people who've been held in solitary confinement and do nothing? So, that's not something that I have heard, but it does not surprise me. I have heard, not specifically about the black eyes, but I've seen text messages sort of back and forth that are being posted on Twitter from people who are inside these facilities saying that they're being treated very, very poorly in subhuman conditions, which is not something that surprises me even a little bit. Okay, we're going to talk about in the next segment about Ghislaine Maxwell and some of the conditions that she's in. Here's what my experience has been with things like this. When prisoners complain, when defendants complain when they're in custody, it is, in my opinion, something that just gets totally thrown out, looked out the other way. What most people in positions of authority tend to believe is that everybody complains. All of the complaints are sort of unjustified. People are doing things to themselves, or they sort of take things one step further, which is, I think, how a lot of, unfortunately, people in America think about criminals to some degree, is that they're just criminals. Who cares, right? No, throw away the key. They did something wrong. They are subhuman, and they sort of get what they deserve. So I know the January 6 prisoners are getting abused. I have no doubt about that, because they are essentially, in many cases, folks, they are being politically prosecuted. Doesn't mean they didn't do anything wrong. Doesn't mean they shouldn't be charged with a crime. But what we're seeing is not a regular criminal prosecution. We're seeing political prosecutions, and there is a big difference there. We have LT13 says, Did you see the ever elusive pipe bomber on January 5th where the tape released was spliced together? So there are parts of the video missing. I did not see that one. The pipe bomber, right? The guy who put, I think, stuff over by the different Capitol buildings. They ever find that guy? I'm not sure. No, but I did not see the spliced together video. A lot of interesting videos out there for sure. Leafy Bug is in the house, says the January 6th incident was infiltrated by the feds, likely initiated by the feds. Look at how the FBI provoked and then entrapped those dumb guys to mouth off on the internet about what they were going to do with Gretchen. This is what they do. You have to be very naive to believe they knew nothing about January 6th in advance. I agree with you, Leafy. I agree with you, which is why I've been upset about this. All right. We've got Sharon says, easy answer to the question as to what group is the most dangerous. Number 1, Trump supporters. Number 2, libertarians. Yeah, I know. And 3, pro-life groups. And number 4, Second Amendment defenders. You got them, Sharon. I mean, that is a lethal combo. Wow, that is dangerous. Wow, it's pretty disastrous to be a libertarian, somebody who sort of adheres to the, non-aggression principle. Yeah, we're pretty dangerous, aren't we? We've got Nadarb out there, says 161 days and still no ID on the supposed pipe bomber. That's nice. Yeah, so nothing on that, right? Which is just, excellent work there, intelligence community. All 18 of you agencies can't find somebody who was in and around the most protected geographic area, should be, in the world. It's pretty embarrassing. My thought is on this is like, what if we just didn't have those intelligence communities? Like, what if they didn't exist? Or let's say we just cut them in half. We just you all are terrible. We're going to pay you what we think you're worth. And as far as we know, all you're doing is just stealing all of our data and spying on all of us, and you're sort of just letting, basic things go wrong. Like, it's basic. Okay, like if the CIA couldn't get their hands around, a Jack Bauer 24 situation to stop a Wuhan lab escape virus from, bursting out of the seams, and, Jack Bauer's racing in there and everybody's waiting in the last minute and the virus escapes. Darn it. Right? That's a tricky thing. The virus is complicated. But just making sure that a bunch of people don't cross a certain barrier and get into a building, it's like, law enforcement 101. Like, they can do this at concerts and schools and sporting events. And our entire interconnected intelligence community couldn't muster that feat. So if we just cut their budgets in half, like, would the Capitol building have been twice as bad? Would it have happened anyways? Ridiculous. Oh my gosh. All right, we've got Edan Test. says, please pronounce my name with the same inflection as Leafy Bug. We got, oh man, I can't do it. We got Edan. We'll try that. I'll play with it, Edan. We'll try it. That extremist group matrix you made is perfect. I've been thinking along these lines. Someone show me the evidence on which groups are posing what threat. I like the cut of your jib. Like you back there, Edan. I'm going to have to work on that one. I appreciate that, right? It's like, hey, you know, we structure our lives this way. If we have a to-do list, we put them in a to-do list. We say, that one's due this time. I need this much money for that. And so they just come out and say it's all white supremacy. And I'm looking around on the news and I don't see big organizations of white supremacists roving around the streets causing havoc and madness. But maybe I'm just missing something. I do have a condition, as you know. Farmer's Daughter 4 says the media belongs on that chart. Oh, you're right. You're right. Yeah, that's a good one. I like that. Well done. We've got Sharon Whitney says, you ask for evidence of preponderance of violence coming from the right. Sorry, evidence? What evidence? We don't need no stinking evidence. Thank you, Sharon. Be Brave says, our federal government is so far out of hand, I don't see how it can be fixed. That's a good point. You know, somebody was asking me about this on Twitter today, and I said pretty clearly there that the solution, if the government does not become dramatically more effective or reduce the burden on its current citizens, people are going to find alternative systems. And in my opinion, that's going to be in the network state on the back of cryptocurrencies in a decentralized, non-governmental system of governance, decentralized governance. That's the answer. So, all right, we've got LT13 is here, says, I had a convo with my police officer friends and was saying how Signal is hackable. And he said he had just taken a class on it and it isn't. Guess how they have the convos? Someone showed the convos. Someone showed the convos. Yeah. So Signal, I've heard that about Signal, actually. I've heard that Signal sort of less secure than Telegram. I don't know. I think that it's probably a good idea to just presume anything that you type in anything digital is going to be monitored. All right. We've got No Doubt says, after much head scratching, I've decided that white supremacist and white privilege definitions are not what you would intuitively think, he says. They are really using the definitions of American supremacy and American privilege and replacing American with white. That way, they can hide the attack on the American principles behind evil-sounding terms. Ooh, wow, yeah. I like what you're saying there. Yeah, sort of. You know, rather than saying that the entire country is bad, it's a divide and conquer strategy is what it is, right? Rather than going at the whole and saying everything in America is bad, you just start sort of separating people. And we've talked about this, right? The idea that there are accelerationists who want to increase division and animosity amongst different demographics in this country in order to exacerbate, increase, and bring about a major revolutionary social change in the country, right? That's the solution. If there is systemic racism, you got to rebuild the system. You got to throw that out and build a new equitable system on top of it. But it's hard to attack an entire system. So now what do you need to do? Well, you got to just sort of start peeling the layers off, start attacking one demographic after another. And so you start dividing people. You say, nope, you're white, you're black, you're Hispanic, and there are big problems between all of you. And we're all standing here going, really? Are there? And they say, yes, there are. And we're going to educate you about this so that we can start, causing a lot of animosity there. Then if you can peel off, like the white folks, it's just a matter of time until there is another group that is oppressive, because this ideology cannot exist without an oppressor and a victim. Currently, it's the white people. Eventually, it's going to be somebody else, and it's just going to just sort of pass around. It'll be the rich people. It'll be the Jewish people. It'll be whatever, and around we go until they can just continue to decimate society, because this is where they get their value. These people have very, very, very twisted hearts and minds and souls, and what they want to do is gobble up power at your expense, and they're working hard at it. We've got Jeremy Matrita over here, says, great show as always, my brother. I'm always listening, not always able to safely comment. As to the last topic, a great man used to say, wisdom guided by experience. Many stories have been coming out that are confirming many of our previous feelings we had about these events. It's right, Jeremy, and you've been here for the long haul, and we've been talking about these things, right? Just scratching our heads saying everything that we're hearing doesn't logically resonate, doesn't make sense. And we start asking questions, and people don't like that, right? We got demonetized in the middle of all this. We got demonetized for what we were talking about right after January 6th. It happened right in February. Okay, we were talking about all of these cases. YouTube said harmful, dangerous information. So you're demonetized now. And, why is that? Okay, as I've said this before, other people may not have been able to sort of, carry on with the show like this. There are other YouTubers being demonetized means that's the end of the content, right? There's nothing else to talk about because they got to go, earn a living. Fortunately, I happen to work at a law firm and we're doing the show anyways because I believe in it. But believe me, YouTube is doing what they can to sort of limit these conversations. Big tech is, big media is, and we're just going to keep on the train to truth, and we're just going to keep sticking to the tried and true principles that we know are right. Okay, freedom, the ability to live your life without an overly burdensome government. We want honesty, we want accountability, we want transparency, we want justice. All the things we talk about here every day, and the government has not been giving it to us. But we know the truth shall set you free, and it does come out eventually, and we're going to be continuing to cover it. So very good stuff over there, and I want to tell you about some very good stuff happening at our law firm, by the way. There's a phone number right there to call. We do some pretty good stuff over here at our firm. We help people with things like traffic tickets and felony charges and drug charges and DUI charges, and the list goes on and on. The phone number is right there, 480-787-0394. There's a QR code there as well, and we're very passionate about helping good people facing criminal charges find safety, clarity, and hope in their lives. And so if you know anybody, we'd be honored if you sent over a referral our way. And if you don't know anybody, that's okay, because you may not need actual criminal legal representation. In fact, I hope you don't, but you definitely need knowledge. That's right. Knowledge is very important. And I've got a place for you to get some of that right here. So law enforcement interaction training is now up and available. This is the program, my friends, that you need. This is something that it is better to have it and never need it than it is to need it and not have it. We talk about the 1, 2, 3 rule in there for dealing with law enforcement. So go check that out if you have not already. And if you've already gone through the course and you're watching the show, I would really appreciate a review over there at gumroad.com/Robert Gruller. All right. Thank you for all of that.